Ever get this, like, weird feeling? Like, what it means to be American is changing right in front of us. It's like that whole melting pot thing. Is it more like separating out these days?
Yeah, it's definitely something people are wrestling with.
So we're diving into that today. We got this article from Social Matter. It's called EthnoGenesis.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Right. It's by this guy, Alan Schmidt. And let me tell you, he gets deep into like the whole history of American identity, where it's going, all that.
The future of American identity, huh? That's a big one.
And you know what? He makes this point right off the bat. That's kind of obvious in hindsight, but we never think about it. America has always been a mix of different groups.
Right, from the jump.
Yeah. Like he uses this example of Maryland and Massachusetts back in colonial days. One was founded by Catholic settlers, the other by Puritans.
Talk about a culture clash. Yeah, right there from the beginning.
Totally. So it's like mini nations within a nation, even back then.
Which feeds into that whole thing Schmidt talks about, ethnogenesis.
Oh, yeah, the birth of new, what was it, ethnicities?
Bingo. But here's where it gets interesting. He says, it's not just about your ancestry, right? It's the shared culture, the values, even how you think that all gets tied in.
So it's like deeper than just, oh, my great-grandparents came from X country.
Way deeper. It's about what binds a group together, what makes them distinct.
And Schmidt argues these differences he's talking about, they weren't just like small potatoes. He even questions whether the North and South, even before the Civil War, were already becoming like two different ethnicities.
Oh, now that's a thought.
Right. He talks about how the North was big on trade, equality, all that, while the South was clinging to this whole hierarchy, aristocracy thing.
Yeah, you can see how those worldviews would clash.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, are those divisions still playing out today in ways we don't even realize?
Oh, absolutely. It makes you question this whole idea of a unified American identity, doesn't it?
It really does. It's like how much of our present is still being shaped by these historical tensions, you know?
Right, and what does that mean for the future? It's fascinating and a little unnerving at the same time.
Okay, so now's where Schmidt really throws us for a loop. He comes out and says it straight up that this whole melting pot idea might be a bust.
Yeah, he doesn't pull any punches, does he? It's like, wait, after all this talk about different groups?
Right. Like, isn't that what we're always told? America, the big melting pot. But Schmidt says, maybe it's happening too well.
Too well. Now, that's an interesting thought. What's he getting at with that?
Well, he argues that with everything moving so fast these days, the internet, social media, pop culture, it's like hard for any real deep traditions to, you know, take root.
I see what he's saying. Like, everything's changing so quickly, it's hard to build up that sense of lasting shared identity.
Exactly. And he says it can lead to this kind of cultural sameness. You know, everyone's watching the same shows, using the same slang.
Right, regardless of where they come from originally or what their family history is.
Yeah, like he even uses this example of a second-generation Korean immigrant who sounds exactly like a woman from, say, the Midwest. Same slang, same pop culture references, everything.
And his point is, does that shared surface culture automatically make them the same ethnicity, even if their backgrounds are totally different?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It makes you think, what does ethnicity really mean in a world where everything's so blended?
Exactly. And Schmidt's not saying this kind of rapid assimilation is like a bad thing for individuals, but he argues it can create this sense of rootlessness on a bigger scale, like shared history and heritage just matter less than they used to.
So you're saying, in a way, we're losing something, even as we gain this kind of superficial sameness.
That's the trade-off Schmidt's pointing out. It's like, what happens when your personal identity is more about your individual choices, your consumer habits, than your deeper roots?
Yeah.
It's a question a lot of people are grappling with these days, whether they realize it or not.
So where do we go from here? If the melting pot's not really melting, what's next?
Well, buckle up, because Schmidt's prediction is pretty wild. He says we're heading for a future where people form these like super tight-knit communities.
Okay, interesting, but not that wild, right? People have always formed communities.
Right, but here's the thing. He says these communities won't be based on like where you're from or your last name. It'll be all about shared values, your outlook on life, that kind of thing.
So we're talking about like a fundamental shift, right? How we define community.
Exactly. Schmidt thinks it's already happening. He points to places like Florida and California where people are practically voting with their feet, you know, moving to be closer to like-minded folks.
It's like they're choosing their own tribes, in a way.
In a way, yeah. And Schmidt's vision, it gets, well, kind of intense. He paints this picture of America becoming like balkanized, all these separate communities, almost like self-sufficient city-states.
Whoa, okay, city-states. He's really going there.
Oh, yeah, he even compares it to, get this, the Tower of Babel.
Wow, okay, that's quite an image. So, like, no more America as we know it.
Well, Schmidt's point is, maybe America as we know it was always kind of an illusion anyway, right? This idea that we're all united by some, like, abstract set of ideals, when in reality, there's always been this tension between different visions of what America should be.
That's true. I mean, we talked about the North and South even before the Civil War.
Exactly. And maybe, in a way, this balkanization is just taking that existing tension to its logical endpoint.
So, if Schmidt's right, and these new value-driven communities really are the future, where does that leave us? I mean, what values would draw us to a certain community?
That's the question, isn't it? And what would we be willing to give up for that sense of belonging? What would be non-negotiable?
That's a lot to unpack. Makes you think.
It really does. This whole idea of ethnogenesis, how it shapes our identity, it's not just some academic theory. It's playing out in our lives, whether we realize it or not.
That's a great point to end on, I think. It's definitely given us all a lot to chew on. And hey, if you're as intrigued by this whole ethnogenesis thing as we are, definitely check out Alan Schmidt's article. It's called EthnoGenesis over at Social Matter. It's a wild ride.
Yeah, it'll definitely make you look at America and maybe even yourself a little differently.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing, folks. Ever get